Hey there guys, I'm Pineapple, and today we're going to be taking characters from Marvel's Cinematic Universe and a few from the Fox Mutants universe, and we're going to be talking about what it would be like if they were characters in the My Hero Academia anime. I've been basically just sitting around feeling like I'm going to explode because I literally can't contain my hype for Avengers Endgame any longer, and this video is going to be a good way to let off some of that hype, and also I get to talk about Marvel, which I love, so let's get to converting some of those characters over to My Hero and comparing them to their on-screen versions after that intro. Hit it! Okay, so first and foremost, I have a video that's sort of like this already, where I basically take Captain Marvel and try to place her into the My Hero Academia universe. For those of you who don't know because you're finding this video and my channel for the first time, My Hero Academia is a Japanese anime and manga series where we follow the tale of a young hero who was given the power of the greatest hero ever. He struggles with controlling it, but the story is very much centered around watching the rise of a young new hero in a world that actually needs a powerful new symbol. The world is filled with heroes, and one of the things that actually initially made me interested in the series was how much it reminded me of Marvel Comics. This isn't by accident when you realize how huge of a fan the author Kohei Horikoshi is, even dedicating whole volume covers and art pieces to reference Marvel Comics covers. The life of a world where people having powers is just super common reminds me of the Marvel world that's filled with all sorts of mutants and just randomly enhanced people with superpowers, and each person has their own story. Instead of trying to tell the story of every random person on the block though, let's start getting into the process of taking some of our beloved Marvel characters and making them fit within the My Hero Academia world. One of the first things that we have to do though is explain their powers as quirks, the name for powers in the My Hero universe. In My Hero Academia, most people's powers or quirks come from genetic mutations in their body that tend to get passed down, so it's pretty similar to the X-Men and their X gene, but in this world, having an ability is so common that you could say that the majority of the populace is part of this X gene having society, and because of that and various other things that have happened prior to the beginning of the story, there aren't really the same struggles of extreme prejudice that the X-Men face generally. There are still some weird people out there, but generally quirks are rather accepted, and as much as possible without ruining the fun of the series, quirks are also things that can be explained through some sort of biological function. That's to say that Horikoshi likes to try to explain the abilities instead of just hand-waving them and saying the character can use magic because they can use magic. You'll definitely see that as a running theme in this video as we go through some of these characters. So first, this wouldn't be a fun list if I didn't start with the young king himself, Spider-Man. I'm sure anyone watching this video knows who Spider-Man is, but I'm actually going to be using the Miles Morales version of this character. That's not just because his popularity has skyrocketed over the last few years thanks to his involvement in some dope Marvel storylines and his own Spider-Verse movie, but also because I feel like Miles' story has some similarities to the ones being told in the actual My Hero story, so he'd fit right in. How would you do Miles Morales' character in the My Hero Academia universe? Well, first I'd have Miles be born with a quirk that's pretty much identical to the well-known hero, Spider-Man. His quirk basically lets him embody the various attributes of a spider, allowing him to do all sorts of things like climb walls, sense danger, and give him way enhanced stats. Growing up, he'd seen Spidey save the day on numerous occasions and idolized him, but at the same time was embarrassed because he was a superfan and people made fun of him and treated him like an unoriginal copy. Miles doesn't quite have the self-confidence to swing around so wildly and do some of the things that Spider-Man does, but this lets him focus on other areas of his quirk, and eventually he learns that he has some moves that even Spider-Man himself can't do. He can make himself invisible, and he can also send out a damaging venom strike on contact with an enemy. These mixed together with his strength and agileness easily help him get into the UA Academy for Heroes, and at this special school, students train to become pro superheroes to be able to actually get licenses to use their quirks and abilities for the greater good. I think it's a no-brainer that Miles would aspire to be a hero like his idol, and during his time here, I think this is when you'd start bringing in more parts of Miles' backstory, like the death of Peter Parker. I think having Peter Parker die while Miles is in school, learning to further hone his powers, right around the time that Miles gets his provisional license to actually spend time working as a hero, would be the perfect thing to activate Miles and cause him to become the web-swinging Spider-Man that we all know that he can be. Miles taking on the mantle of Spider-Man and proving himself as he took on that name and grew throughout his time at UA would be an excellent story, especially when you think about how this story could easily run alongside the story of our main characters in the series, and also how well Miles actually fits into the universe with a lot of his story intact. He really embodies everything that it means to be a hero, and honestly, he's one of the characters in this video that I'd love to see the most in a My Hero Academia Marvel crossover, if that ever were to happen, not only because I'm a massive fan of Spider-Man as a whole, but again because Horikoshi himself is a self-professed Spider-Man stan. Either way, I think Miles would fit in without any trouble, unlike our next character. James Howlett was born with a quirk that gave him multiple superhuman stat boosts that would only heighten and heighten the more that he got amped up. He would lose himself in fighting and war, and as he'd tear through his enemies with his bone claws, he'd go into a full rage and wipe out everything in the room with him like a wild animal. James Howlett of course goes by another name, Wolverine or Logan. I think Logan would best fit further in the past of the My Hero world. He probably wouldn't be amongst the first generation of quirk users, but he'd be around in the darker days of society when heroes weren't so common and wars needed soldiers. With his quirk Feral, he made a great warrior that would be let loose in enemy territory, but he wasn't perfect, he was still only human. Eventually he got involved in shadier and shadier work, and as he developed grudges and business relationships, that eventually brought him to a certain program. In this story basically, Logan finds himself as part of a really early version of the Nomu creation program. Basically, Nomu are beings in the My Hero universe that are kidnapped, experimented on, and then they have multiple quirks and abilities to force onto them as they're made into living weapons of destruction. The early stage of the program enhanced Logan's already existing quirk, and the various experiments slowed his aging amongst other things, but made him more volatile and dangerous. As All For One worked on creating the Nomu alongside various doctors, they stripped Logan of his memories and forced onto him a quirk that would coat his bones in an indestructible biometal. Wolverine would end up escaping from these experiments to learn more about what happened to him and regain his memories, but eventually he'd learned enough about what happened to him to get involved in the battle against All For One, and let me tell you, that would not be good for All For One. All For One is a villain that can steal the powers of various superheroes and use them for himself or pass them around to others like candy. He uses this ability to act as a sort of warlord in the world of MHA's underground, but Wolverine is exactly the sort of problem that All For One doesn't want, because Wolverine would absolutely tear through anything and anyone getting in his way of hunting down All For One, and he's extremely resourceful. Ultimately, the big problem would come down to Wolverine's slowed aging, as that would allow him to be around to be a thorn in All For One's side long term. Sure, All For One should be worrying about his ancient enemy's greatest power, One For All, getting passed down amongst amazing heroes planning to take him down, but I'm sure he'd be way more terrified of a seemingly immortal quirk user who cuts through everything and stops at nothing to get him and does not give up. The next hero we'll talk about is one of my personal favorites in the MCU, Thor, Odin's son, but on Earth, he's known as Donald Blake. Thor is a bit more difficult to do as his modern and MCU interpretation, because in the My Hero world, we don't exactly have gods or beings from other worlds in the series. To sort of get around this while also keeping some of Thor's classic backstory intact, we have ourselves a young man named Donald Blake who grew up with a quirk that gave him control over very minor levels of energy. Usually it let him absorb electricity or energy from things and transfer that energy to other things, and it even let him cause little sparks with his hands. One day while on his way home, he was crossing a small grassy field with a new giant set of weights, and a severe thunderstorm was soon over him. Of course, he was struck by a barrage of lightning bolts as his muscles clenched and his body forcibly held up the barbell and weight that was attracting the lightning to him in the first place. Put in a position to either do or die, his body, without him even realizing it, began absorbing the power of the lightning, and as he screamed to get his quirk under control as he was still having lightning poured into him from the sky above, he raised this heavy weight that he was struggling to keep up high over his head with one arm in the air, as he could feel a strength and power in himself that he'd never felt before. Resigning himself to learning how to master this power and also seeing that training his quirk would grant him way more strength than training his body alone, he set out to the Nordic lands far away from people to train his powers and gather energy until he could return home with a new name: Thor, the god of thunder. With his new abilities, Thor would basically be able to discharge extremely controlled arcs of lightning, he'd be able to use his lightning charged body to summon even more from the sky, and he'd even be able to charge that into things like weapons. Of course, he would have to have a big metal hammer made out of the lightning charged metal from his weights from that fateful day that are charged with all of the same energies that he was initially charged with when his powers got supercharged in the first place. And for the added flair, we'll say that it's also magnetically tied to him somehow because of that accident in his powers, so nobody else can lift it. Thor having a quirk that would give him control over lightning much in the same way that Todoroki can control fire and ice is really cool, and it's also on a whole nother level to, let's say, Kaminari in the series, because Kaminari can only discharge electricity with a limited amount that he can output at once before he fries his mind. Thor is like the ultimate version of that, and on top of that, with his bombastic personality and large muscular structure, he's kind of like a lightning All Might, and that's just awesome. The second to last hero we'll talk about is Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk. I could go the really simple route and just give Bruce a transforming quirk that activates when he's angry, but there's already been a quirk like that in the My Hero movie, and even though Hulk is the original hero, not the copy, I'd like to get a little more creative with Hulk while staying true to his character. Bruce Banner in this MHA world is born without a quirk to his knowledge. He lives his life shattered from a terrible childhood where his father was wildly abusive. As time went on, the conflicted scientist dived into his studies on quirk research and became a wildly acclaimed specialist in this field, and this is when he discovered that he too had the quirk gene, but his quirk was seemingly a dud. It's like when you know you're probably allergic to something but haven't come across that thing yet, so you really don't know what could trigger it. So here we have a situation where a scientist is living with a huge variable in his life. Is his quirk going to manifest, and what could it be, and what could trigger it? He sort of toils over this for a while, and the stress really gets to him alongside all of the other work that he has. One day he's attacked at a conference between doctors and scientists on quirk information and knowledge, and sadly, he's exposed to massive levels of gamma radiation as a result of this villain attack. Almost everyone in the immediate area was killed or somehow really sickened, but Bruce survived. Bruce woke up in the hospital and ended up being released to go home within just a day. Not understanding what happened, he would go on to live his normal life, but there would be periods of time where he'd just black out and not remember where he was or what he did. He'd find himself in all sorts of different places, like in clubs and trees and open fields across the world, and he had no idea what was going on, but he feared that the villain attack was somehow affecting him in a way that was causing him to start losing time. So to get a handle of the situation, he goes to a fellow scientist and friend, Tony Stark. Now, Tony Stark monitors Bruce and tells him that his quirk saved his life because Bruce is still irradiated enough that he should feel very sick, but he's perfectly fine. His body has largely absorbed the radiation, and Stark proposes the thought that Banner's quirk is to absorb large amounts of radiation, which could make him massively useful in the field of science, but there's a big problem. Through monitoring him further, Stark would also realize that Bruce has been transforming into these large other beings that we all know as the Hulks. The Hulks come in various colors like gray and green, and ultimately they realize that Banner's body is able to absorb high levels of radiation, but his actual quirk is to be able to manifest his personalities through physical transformations. Usually these changes in Banner's fractured mind would be extremely minor, but the radiation that he absorbed has come together with his quirk to create the Hulk. This plays on the run of comic focused on the Hulk being an alternate persona of Banner, while also having other Hulks alongside himself, making up the group of different colored Hulks that have come out of Banner over the course of Marvel Comics. I think having a Banner that has access to different Hulks is something that'd be really fun in a more anime type world like My Hero Academia, and it also adds a little more to the character before ultimately we get to Professor Hulk, which is a powered down version of the Hulk that keeps Banner's personality and mind in control. Ultimately, Hulk would sort of be like Tokoyami, where part of his quirk is that his body has the attributes of a bird, and he can also summon Dark Shadow. In this case, Bruce has a body that can absorb high levels of radiation, and he can also turn into the Hulk. Finally, we come to the X-Men's red-headed troublemaker, Jean Grey. Jean Grey, with a My Hero twist, would be a young woman with a quirk that allowed her to do many things with her super enhanced mind. Of course, she'd have high intellect, but over time, she was able to develop telepathy that allowed her to read people's thoughts, and telekinesis that allowed her to lift all sorts of things and even fly. She was wildly powerful, and everyone viewed her as a top contender for the top 10 hero rankings after she graduated from hero school, but that's where the issues began. Around the time that her powers were really starting to grow during puberty, Jean Grey would start accidentally reading the minds of others in large groups, and this inability to turn off the thoughts of others and have peace and quiet, coupled with her harsh upbringing, contributed quite a bit to her instability. Jean Grey would eventually come to terms with living as a bipolar individual and did a really good job at keeping herself in check, but it's something that even as an adult pro-hero, she's still not amazing at. When Jean Grey fails to keep control of her emotions, especially her anger, her personality switches and she becomes the Phoenix. The Phoenix is an alternate version of Jean that embodies her frustration and her wrath. And this form of Jean can use pyrokinesis and has such a fine level of control over telekinesis that she can pull away and manipulate the bonds that hold literal molecules together, meaning that she can basically disintegrate you with her mind. Her rage with these abilities, on top of enhanced versions of her already super powerful powers, are what make the Phoenix one of the characters that is certainly powerful and could save the town against maybe even a few high-end Nomu, but at what cost? It might be too dangerous, honestly, to poke at that flame. For now, these have been 5 different Marvel superheroes as My Hero Academia characters, but let me know if you want to see more. I had a lot of fun making this video, and there are plenty of heroes that I could talk about, like Black Panther, Doctor Strange, and maybe even some villains like Thanos. Let me know if you want a part 2 by getting this video to 1,000 likes. I hope you guys enjoy the Marvel content, and I hope you all get out to see Avengers Endgame to see the end of the 22 movie journey that's kept us entertained with some of our favorite characters over the last 10 years. Salute to fans of heroes worldwide, no matter what fandom you're in, and I've got to go work on some other videos, so I'll be back shortly. Follow me on Twitter at VocalPineapple and subscribe for more. Peace.